r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Jenny_Joe. Never whistle in the woods. My husband Darren and I loved going to the mountains. Our first date was on the reservation chasing wild horses. He was just under half Native American and I was a descendant of a very small unrecognized tribe in the Pacific Northwest. Darren was very wise in the traditions and spiritual ways of the native life. Born and raised into that way of life. I was raised not knowing my Notve heritage until much later in my life. Darren would tell me stories of going hunting with his uncle. He told me one time they stepped into Bigfoot's bed. He said it was the most horrendous smell he has ever smelled. One story went that after a long day of hunting, they were headed back to the truck and they heard someone calling their names. They tried to find the person calling their names and they started to get further from the truck. It was getting dark and they knew they needed to get home and they were not getting any closer to the sound, so they decided to go back to the truck. On their way out of the mountains they saw red lights on the road that looked like truck taillights. They watched these lights from a good distance and it seemed if the vehicle was driving erratically. All of a sudden the taillights looked as if the vehicle went into a good-sized ditch. They sped up to get to the location of the wreck. They stopped and got out of the truck and ran to the side of the ditch only to find nothing in the embankment. They both looked at each other and Uncle quickly said, "Let's go, get in the truck." Darren was still worried that someone may be hurt. He looked at the ground and didn't see any tire marks on the road or ditch. He asked, "What is going on?" Uncle said very quickly, almost in a growl, "Get in the truck now." Darren quickly got in the truck and Uncle sped down the road only staring straight at the road. He asked Uncle, "What is going on?" again. Uncle replied, "Shut up. We'll discuss this later." Darren looked out the window and saw red taillights driving between impossibly close trees and racing through the woods. He turned to tell Uncle and without removing his eyes from the road Uncle said no. Uncle didn't say another word or remove his eyes from the road until they got home. When they were in the house Uncle told Darren that they had been lured by stick Indians. Uncle told him that they are spirits that like to play tricks on humans. They are normally good-natured spirits, but if the spirits are angered they are known to kill people. Uncle said these trickster spirits love the sound of people whistling. When you're in the woods, never whistle. When you're on any native land, do not whistle. I laughed at Darren's stories. Bigfoot's bed? Come on. There is no Bigfoot. There is no scientific proof of him. We've found proof of dinosaurs, we could at least find proof of something still supposedly roaming our mountains. I've argued this many times with Darren and he swore it to be true. He believes. Aliens, yep, he believes. Ghosts, again, he believes. I had an odd experience that I once blamed on a ghost. A man had committed suicide in the driveway of a house I rented. My parents owned the house. I knew the previous tenants. I knew of the man. As I was unpacking my closet the door closed. I opened the door and after a few moments it closed again. I moved the heavy box in front of the door and resumed unpacking. Again the door closed. I opened the door and ran out of the house. I stood in the middle of the yard and called my parents. "I can't live here. There is a ghost. It shut the door on me," I yelled with a shaking voice. "Are you kidding me right now? There are no such thing as ghosts. There is a logical explanation. The house is old, it is uneven and the doors close on their own all the time. The wind could have blown it closed," my mom said in her annoyed voice that she often has with me. "You wanted to move in there and agreed to rent it. We can't find another renter that quickly and your sister has already taken your room. You're 20 years old, it's time to grow up, Jen." And then she hung up on me. Okay. I got this. I walked in the house like I owned it. I did, didn't I? I walked into the closet and shouted, "Todd, leave me the FCK alone." And proceeded to unpack. Nothing else happened that day. Parents are always right, there is no such thing as ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts. Darren and I packed up for a long weekend in the mountains, excited to be taking Ellen, our 8-year-old, and Shelley, our 20-year-old, daughters camping for the first time this spring. Shelley pulled in the driveway and jumped out of her car and immediately gave her dad a quick kiss on the cheek saying, "Hi Pops." "Hi Toots. Where's Ellen?" Almost as if being summoned, Ellen ran to Shelley gleefully saying, "We're going to the cave. It has bats in it." We all loaded into the Chevy truck and started up to the camping spot. Partway there Shelley said, "Dad, isn't there stick Indians up there? I read a few stories online." Darren replied, "Yes. We are going to be careful and nobody is to whistle." I chuckled under my breath. This earned me a sideways glance from Darren. Ellen shouted, "Dad, I'm still learning how to whistle. I can't practice this weekend?" "No practice this weekend. "You can practice when we get home," he replied. We found a quiet little spot off the road and near the river. We unpacked everything and got camp set up fairly quickly. "Hey, I'm going down to the river real quick, I'll be right back," I shouted to Darren. "Be careful," he replied. "I want to go with you, Mom," Ellen called out. "No, stay here, I'll be right back," I called over my shoulder. I walked a little ways out of the campsite and started absent-mindedly whistling the tune of Green Acres as I walked to the river. I leaned over and washed my hands in the cold water. As I stood up, I heard Ellen calling, "Mom. Where are you?" I slightly huffed. So much for 5 minutes of peace and quiet. It sounded like she was downriver a ways. I started walking toward her voice. "Mom?" This time it sounded a little more frantic. I started to panic and started running. Had she fallen in the river? "Mom. Mom, please." My heart was pounding in my chest so hard I could hardly breathe. I had to find her. Why wasn't Darren running down here? Where was he? Why did he let her wander off? I stopped and listened. Nothing. I screamed, "Ellen?" I heard a giggle that sounded similar to Ellen's, but slightly different. I looked around and realized I had no idea where I was. But I knew I could just walk up the river and eventually find camp. "Ellen? Where are you, honey?" I called out. "Okay, you need to come out. We need to get back to camp. Daddy will be worried about us." Far off in the distance I heard Ellen being called. It was Darren looing for us. But it sounded like he was across the river. I hadn't crossed the river though. "Darren! Over here!" I yelled out. I heard the giggle again. It sounded like she was right behind me. I quickly spun around but she wasn't there. "Jen? Ellen?" Darren called from even further down river now. "Damn it. Ellen, come out right now. We have to go. I'm not playing anymore," I said, frustrated now. Why didn't I let her just come with me in the first place, and then we wouldn't be in this mess? "Jen?" Darren called out, but it sounded like he was across the river again. He sounded so close. Like I should have been able to see him on the river bank. "Darren, I'm right over here," I called out. I listened but never heard him shout out for Ellen. "Did you find Ellen?" I called out to him. I heard her giggle again. "I'm headed back to camp," I yelled out to Darren. I turned toward the sound of the giggle and said, "If you want to continue hiding along the way, that's fine, but let's start back." I stepped back to walk upriver, but I felt a squish in my boots. I looked down and saw that my jeans were soaked up to the knees. Water squished from my boot as I stepped. I hadn't gotten in the river. There were no puddles I had stepped in. How did I get wet? I looked up at the sky and realized it was getting dark. How could that be? It should only be noon, or 1 o'clock at the latest. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I knew I wouldn't have service, but I could check the time. My phone was black with multicolored lines all over it. I turned it off and turned it back on, only to see the same screen of multicolors. I put it back in my pocket. It must have gotten wet too. "Ellen, come out. This is enough. I'm done playing and you're in serious trouble," I threatened. "Mom." It came from downriver again. Had she ran further downriver when I wasn't paying attention? Why was she doing this? She never behaved like this. All of the sudden it was pitch black. So dark that I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. To make matters worse, the moon wasn't out. I knew Ellen would be scared out of her mind. We both shared a fear of the dark. "Ellen?" I said as calmly as I could muster. "Nothing." I panickingly yelled out. "Darren?" "Nothing." "Shelley? Can anyone hear me?" I yelled. Silence. Survival instinct finally kicked in. If you're lost, sit tight and someone will find you. Darren and Shelley would be looking for us. Besides, come daylight, if we hadn't be found, we just walk upriver to camp. "Ellen, I know you're scared, baby. But I'm right here. I'm not leaving you. Just sit down right where you are. We'll get out of here soon," I said out loud. Nothing. Not an "okay, mommy." Not an "I'm scared." Nothing but silence. I tried repeatedly to talk to Ellen but never got a response. I was so confused. How could this have happened? Where was she? Why wasn't she answering me? What in hell was happening? An overwhelming urge to sleep hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't force my eyes to stay open no matter how hard I tried. Maybe that's why Ellen wasn't answering. Maybe she had fallen asleep too? I told myself it's late, it won't hurt to sleep until morning. I dozed for what felt like 15 minutes. I dreamed that Ellen had found me in the dark. She had crawled to me and held my hand. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Mommy." I jumped wide awake. The sun was high in the sky. I looked down at the hand that Ellen had held in my dream. There was a stick with 5 small offshoots intertwined between my fingers. I violently shook it free from my hand. "Ellen?" I called out. Still nothing. "Darren?" I yelled. Silence. I looked around and nothing looked like it had yesterday. The river wasn't off to my right. The river wasn't there at all. I had never sleepwalked in my life and I couldn't imagine I'd have started overnight. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket again, hoping that maybe it had dried out overnight. This time the screen was all black except for where the signal bars are supposed to be. In their place was a no service signal. I turned and noticed a large tall rock formation in the distance. It didn't look to be too far away. Maybe if I could get up high enough I could see camp or they can hear me yelling. Maybe I could get cell service. I climbed the rock tower, gaining a few bumps, bruises, scratches, and cuts. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I have no bars for service but it still shows 4G. The only thing that shows on my screen is Reddit. Please help.